Once we cross it, over by that walnut tree there will be some stepping stones, and then we'll be able to see Emerald Pond. The gardens are just beyond it. They walked single file, the frosty grass dampening their shoes. Deer tracks were frozen in the winter mud, and raccoons had left their handprints along the shore of the creek. The stepping stones were there, just like Margaret had remembered. There! The pond lay just beyond them, green and glassy like a bright eye. There was ice around the edge. But the diving platform's gone. Margaret couldn't hide her disappointment. Had they taken it down for the winter? She led the others around to the right. There she saw something even stranger. The dam, which she had helped to build, had disappeared. She ran along the bank looking. Here was the exact spot where they'd built it, with the sand bank on one side and the rocky shelf on the other. But the stones were all gone, gone from the water, not even tumbled up on the bank where the ice had dislodged them. She stared. "What is it?" asked Leon quickly. She shook her head. She couldn't answer, not yet. She hurried on, not waiting for the others now. She came to the edge of the gardens. The carefully manicured plots of cabbages, beets, onions, carrots. Everything was gone. There was only dirt. With a few stones in it. That was it. There were no beehives. And where Margaret remembered a row of blackberry bushes, only one scraggly plant remained. There was no sign of rats, or rats had ever lived there. Only the brown meadow grass, the mud here and there, and a bedraggled clump of vines. "But it was here," Margaret whispered. "What?" "Their garden." She moved her arm in a circle in front of them. The broccoli was there. I remember because Artie stepped on it by accident. The potatoes were here, cabbages right there, and the water pipe came up just about here. It was for the hot months in case there wasn't enough rain, and the bamboo that they made the pipes out of grew right here. She held her arm still and then let it drop. Leon looked at her doubtfully. "You sure we're in the right place?" She nodded. "The nest is on the other side of that grove of pines. Well, at least it was." He glanced over one shoulder. "Here come the others." She'd almost forgotten about them all. She didn't want to see them now. She turned and ran, Leon beside her. "Come on!" She ran through the pine grove, slowing down enough to notice that the clearing contained a massive bramble. The paved walk that led to the grove was gone. She found the clay bank where the nest had been. The doors and the windows were all smoothed out. Even the little bamboo faucet that had gotten Arthur in so much trouble was gone. Margaret was flooded with disappointment. The valley had changed. "Where are they?" she whispered. "I think they ran away," Leon said. "But why?" "They were afraid. Afraid of being caught." "Well, I wouldn't have hurt them, never." "No, you wouldn't. They know that. And I wouldn't, because we're just kids." "But the others?" "Well, Lindsay's nice." "Yeah, but her boss? Or how about the pilot?" Leon shrugged. They couldn't be sure who would come. "Margaret?" Her dad was standing with Lindsay and Dave beside the pine grove. She walked back slowly. "They're not here," she said. Lindsay took a step toward her as if she wanted to help. "What about the gardens and the nest and the other places you told me about?" "It's all changed. The gardens were right over there." Dave walked over to where the lettuce and the spinach should be. "It's just full of rocks," he said. He picked up some and showed them. "Honey, are you sure we're in the right place?" Her dad put his hands on her shoulders, staring into the blue wool of his jacket. Margaret remembered the rows of beets and onions and lettuces laid out so neatly in the dark, crumbling earth. Yet there were only mud and stones and brambles. "I don't know," she murmured. "I just don't know." She showed them the other places, the nest, the wheat field, the dam. Everything was changed or gone. She felt as if she were in a dream, except that it was real and now. And then suddenly the summer seemed unreal, as if it had never happened at all. "But you have that picture," Lindsay said gently. "Remember? The one you took at the amusement park?" "Picture," Margaret nodded dumbly. The others were standing around her in a circle. She wanted to run away, but she couldn't. And then she suddenly felt what it must be like to be trapped once and for all. Inside a cage where you wouldn't be able to see the sun or a moon, feel the earth under your feet, or the rain or the wind or the dew. Of course they'd run away, and she would do nothing else that would let them be found. The picture? Margaret repeated. It wasn't real. Lindsay looked at her oddly as if she sensed the change, and Leon saw it too. But it was in the pocket of your pajamas. No. Lindsay looked at Leon. He looked down at the ground and then he looked at Margaret. Actually, I never saw it, he said. They stood together silently. Dave put the camera in his coat pocket. Then her dad stepped out of the circle and hugged her tight. It's okay, honey, he said. They left the valley an hour later. Margaret didn't want to go. She was held by memories, sunny days, hard work, the smell of pine needles, the taste of creek water, the feel of rock on her hands and knees. She'd come from one world into another, rising from an armchair in front of the television to pass through a door into a life that she couldn't have imagined. And the rats had been part of that, of course. But even if she never saw them again, she closed her eyes tight when she thought of that. Even if she didn't, she had learned from the valley itself. Leon sat beside her on the ride home. When their eyes met, Margaret put one finger to her lips. Later, she murmured. He nodded slightly. The helicopter brought them back over the mountain and the forest, over the green pastures to the suburbs and into the city itself. Like a big metal bug, and it hovered over factories and skyscrapers, schools and offices. Before they landed, Lindsay put one hand on Margaret's shoulder. You have my phone number, she said softly. Margaret nodded. She kept her eyes looking straight ahead. A moment later, they were off. They got off the helicopter. Her mother was in the car waiting for them. What happened? She asked. They were gone, Margaret said. Oh. Her mom looked surprised but relieved too. She squeezed Margaret's hand. Tell me about it later, she said. Dinner's in the oven, and if we leave right now, it'll be ready when we get home. And now this is, actually, there's one little wee chapter. It's chapter 29. It's 3 pages. Arthur didn't tell anyone about the trip to the valley, but he thought a lot about what happened there. He decided to write it in his book. He waited until Saturday morning when the rest of the family slept late. He opened his closet door and went in. He pushed through the row of clothes in the front and went underneath the eaves. It was very cold in there. On a hook behind the coat hangers, he found one of Margaret's old sweaters, a brown one with Popeye on the front. He put it on over his sleeper pajamas. He got the black crayon from the windowsill. That was when he noticed the picture. It was an ice picture on the inner surface of the storm window. Arthur had seen them before. They appeared in cold weather and were made of patches of frost and ice crystals. When he asked his mum, she said that fairies made them, but he didn't believe in fairies. The picture was special. The frost formed jagged peaks like mountains, and each peak was covered with tiny blossoms, the crystals themselves. And beyond the mountains was an oblong sphere made out of tiny droplets of water, a lake or maybe a river. But this was the strangest part. There was a boat on it. The mast was another line of water, tall and thin, and beside it was the faint shadow of a sail, and the hull itself shaped like a pointed shoe. Arthur stared. Why, that's the boat Christopher and I are going to sail on, he thought. Christopher said we'll sail around the world one day, and here's the boat to prove it. He got to work on the story. He made his lines carefully, thick ones, curly ones, loops, and squiggles. He told about the valley as it had been this time, the brown grass, the empty garden, the thicket in the pine grove. He told how Margaret had lied about the picture and how Leon had lied too. The grown-ups had been upset and wanted to go home. He told them how he had slipped away for a moment while they were talking, looking back to make sure that they weren't watching. He trotted down to the stream, to the oak tree. He pulled the vines away from the base, searching for a present from Christopher. There wasn't a feather or a pretty rock or even a bit of bread or with honey on it. At first he was disappointed, and then his fingers touched something. He looked again, and there, drawn in the frozen dirt under the vines, was an arrow. It pointed towards the slopes that rose further down the valley, where the mountains grew steeper and closer together. So that's where they went, he thought. He took a stick and scratched the arrow out so no one else would see it. After all, it was his secret, his and Christopher's. He stopped writing and examined his work. He added a dot, a backward loop, and here, at the part about the arrow, he drew a picture. Would he tell Margaret? He stood still, considering maybe one day, if he felt like it. It was hard to say. He shivered. It was chilly in the closet, even with her sweater on, and furthermore he was hungry. He set the crayon back on the windowsill. His stomach growled, and he left the closet, closed the door behind him. He thought he heard his mother getting up. He would like toast, he decided. Toast and cereal and orange juice. And he headed down the hall to let her know. Have fun, Ben! Bye!